We're back in our nice and cozy studio, ready to report to you the news of what's happening around the promised land. And actually,
Mr. E, don't call me Ashley.
excuse me? Well, as I was saying, surely we'll be able to.
Don't call me Shirley either.
I didn't call you Ashley or Shirley. Okay, now, as I was saying, we're going to report the news around the promised land and actually what's happening outside of the promised land, as well as it has to do with directly with the people we've been focusing on for the last couple of months. Israel.
You got that right, Mr. E. And in today's episode, you can expect this week's weather report, an update on the local plum supply, and our main feature on some interesting stuff that is happening right outside the promised land. And we'll also see how Israel is in the thick of it.
Don't call me Ashley.
What? That's not how the joke goes, Mr. E. You've ruined it. Sorry, folks. Anyway, we'll now hear from Mr. Uncertain T as he gives us the noonday news. Take it away, Mr. Uncertain T.
Thanks, Get the Kid. Today there will possibly be a slight breeze coming from the west, with a chance of showers towards this evening. And if that doesn't happen, then it will possibly be sunny out. Back to you guys in the studio.
Okay. I don't feel too sure of what the weather will be today. Do I wear a jacket or a tank top? Oh well. We'll now turn it over to Milligram for the weekend recap.
We'll begin with the report on the interesting things taking place right outside the Promised Land. Now, some of Israel decided way before they took over the Promised Land that they liked the land right outside the Promised Land, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. But they were made to promise that they would go in and fight with their family for the Promised Land, and they agreed. We'll see that they fulfilled their end of the bargain and helped their family fight for the Promised Land, so Joshua sent them back to their land to live. When Joshua sent them back to their land, it is reported that Joshua told them, "Only be very careful to observe the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God and to walk in all his ways and to keep his commandments and to cling to him and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." So Joshua showed that they must continue to follow God even though they were not living with the rest of their family in the Promised Land.
Okay. Thanks, man. But that's all you have? That's not too interesting. I mean, it's nice and all that they got sent back to the land. And of course, it's good that Joshua told them to follow God. But that's really isn't something we, as an established and professional news station, should be reporting. Right, Kid the Kid?
You got that right, Mr. E. So, Millie Graham, what else you got?
Oh, Mr. E and Get the Kid, you've got to wait for it. You think that's all I've got? You've got to have more faith in me. I've got the inside scoop on the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. You wouldn't believe it, but the rest of Israel got word that they had made an altar and they thought they were rebelling against God.
No way. They wouldn't. These three tribes rebelled against God?
Oh man, this is not going to be good. I can't imagine what Israel is going to do. I bet they just might wipe out these three tribes. Mr. E, there might be civil war.
Oh, yeah, that would be quite the report. Civil War in Israel, Part 1. That would get people's attention. Tell us, Milligram, is there any more information right now?
Yes, there is. So yeah, you guys are right. Israel was not happy, and they prepared to fight against their own family because they believed that they had disobeyed God by making this altar. There was about to be civil war in Israel. So Phinehas the priest at the time and several leaders of Israel went to talk to the three tribes. The three tribes explained that they hadn't made this altar to rebel against God, but they actually made it to stand as a witness or something to remind Israel that they belonged to Israel. So they were not disobeying God, but wanted to be seen as the people of God so that they could worship God. When this was explained, Phinehas, the leader, and the leaders headed back home, so Israel was able to avoid civil war. Whew, that was a close one.
Got that right, Billy Graham. That would have been bad. I'm glad to hear that things were resolved. That certainly would have made an interesting news report, though. Civil war in Israel. But I'm sure everyone, including us in our studio, are all better off if we have peace in Israel instead.
Good point, Get the Kid. Thanks, Billy Graham.
That was a pretty good and interesting news report from the terrific trio at the Promised Land news station. I want us to think about the story that Millie Graham reported on. That story is yet another story from the book of Joshua. And that story takes place in Joshua chapter 22. All right, Joshua chapter 22. Now, last week we talked about Joshua dividing up the promised land for all the tribes and the families of Israel. And we saw how Caleb actually set the example for all of Israel, going in and taking his land. Well, that section of Joshua dividing the promised land ends in Joshua chapter 21. And it ends with this. If you look with me at Joshua chapter 21, verses 43 through 45. Joshua 21, verses 43 through 45. This dividing up of the promised land ends with this. It says, starting in verse 43, "Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers. And they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass." So this is a pretty cool passage. This teaches us about the faithfulness of God. Joshua 21, 43 through 45 teaches us about the faithfulness of God. That God will do all that he says he will do. That God fulfills his promises. That if God told Israel that he would do something, then he would surely do it. So we see God was faithful to Israel. As we move on into the book of Joshua, we might ask a question. If God was faithful to Israel, will Israel be faithful to God? That's kind of the question we could ask as we go on in the book of Joshua. Will they do what God has commanded them to do? Will they obey God in the land that he has given them? Well, we actually get a glimpse in Joshua 22. So if you look with me there, just turn over a page or turn over a chapter in your Bible. Joshua 22 was the story that the Promised Land news station was reporting to us. How Joshua commanded the Reubenites, the Gadites, the half-tribe of Manasseh to obey God in their land. I believe Millie Graham actually quoted word for word what Joshua said in Joshua chapter 22. Well, these three tribes, they go into their land and they build an altar. And the rest of Israel thinks that they have disobeyed God by doing this. As we hear this, we might wonder, what's all the fuss about? Okay, what's the big deal with these three tribes building an altar? Well, we find if we look back in the book of Deuteronomy, so the book that comes right before the book of Joshua, in Deuteronomy, Israel was supposed to worship at one place and one place only. So this was disobeying God, and even further, as Israel says in this chapter, that they were rebelling against God if they did this. Israel saw that these three tribes were being unfaithful to God. But we find out as we move along in Joshua 22 that rather than these three tribes being unfaithful to God, that they were actually scared that they would be forced to be unfaithful to God in the time to come. If you look with me at our next passage, Joshua 22, verses 21 through 29, if you turn with me there, we're going to see why these three tribes, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, why they built this altar. And it wasn't because they were being unfaithful, but because they were scared that they were going to be forced to be unfaithful by the people of Israel. Look with me at Joshua 22, starting at verse 21. It says, "Then the people of Reuben, the people of Gad, the half tribe of Manasseh said in answer to the heads of the families of Israel, the mighty one, God, the Lord, the mighty one, God, the Lord, he knows, and let Israel itself know, if it was in rebellion or a breach of faith against the Lord, do not spare us today for building an altar to turn away from following the Lord. Or if we did so to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings on it, may the Lord himself take vengeance. No, but we did it from fear, that in a time to come your children might say to our children, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you people of Reuben and people of Gad. You have no portion in the Lord. So your children might make our children cease to worship the Lord. Therefore we said, let us now build an altar, not for burnt offering, nor for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you, and between our generations after us, that we do perform the service of the Lord in his presence with our burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings. So your children will not say to our children in the time to come, you have no portion in the Lord. And we thought, if this should be said to us or to our descendants in the time to come, we should say, behold, the copy of the altar of the Lord, which our fathers made, not for burnt offerings nor for sacrifice, but to be a witness between you, us and you. Far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn away this day from following the Lord by building an altar for burnt offering, grain offering, or sacrifice, other than the altar of the Lord our God that stands before his tabernacle." So these three tribes explain that this altar is a witness, or it's something to remind them, or even more so Israel, that they belong to Israel, so that they can continue to worship the Lord, so that they can continue to be faithful to God as he was faithful to them. These three tribes were seeking to be faithful to God. That's the main point of this story. That's the main concern here in Joshua 22. Just as God was faithful to Israel, they must be faithful to him. Just as God is faithful to us, to you and to me, we need to be faithful to God. How are you doing in being faithful to God, in obeying God no matter what, in following God no matter where you are or who you're with? These three tribes moved far away from the rest of their family. They could have been tempted to worship other things other than God and not obey him. And just like that, we could be tempted when maybe you're away from your parents, or you're not with those from church, when you're at school, or when you're with another family member, or with a friend that does not follow God. You could be tempted to not follow God, to disobey him, to not be faithful to God. But just as these three tribes were faithful to God, we should follow their example and be faithful to God too, no matter what. Sometimes this can be really hard, and sometimes we can't do this on our own. So we need to pray to God and ask him, God, help us to be faithful. No matter what I'm going through, no matter how hard it is, God, help me to be faithful. So we can pray for strength. We can pray for strength to be faithful to God. Will you be faithful to God? God is faithful to us, and we should be faithful to him. So that's Joshua chapter 22. We'll go back to the Promised Land news station as they close out their report. Here you go.
As we close, we'll close with an update on the local plum market
This better
with
be
none
good.
other than my cousin Randolphy. With none other than my cousin Randolphy. Oh man, he must have forgotten. I finally talked the producers into having him join the main news report, and he doesn't even show up. The guy has become a legend in the Promised Land, and we've been getting demands for him to join our terrific trio. Well, we'll have to try again next week. I'm Gid the Kid.
I'm Mr. E, and that's Millie Graham.
Signing off.